So today I want to share a few ideas that I use when I make sounds with modelers, and I've been using modelers for a few years now, like I guess most of us. There's no perfect situation. Sometimes the modeler works better than an amp. Sometimes the amp works better than a modeler. It is what it is. I make the best of both worlds, so to speak. And so today I want to share a few ideas that I use and I started using consistently to make better sounds for when I use modelers and in-ears or modelers and monitors and so this kind of setup. So the first one is to use a looper. And here in this patch, I've used the looper as the first block. But sometimes I actually have an external modeler, so I can use all the blocks, so to speak, or maybe I will use that as something that I like a send return, so to speak, something that doesn't make any sound, so to speak. So the idea of using the looper is so you have your hand to create a sound, and you're not constantly having to go back and forth between playing something and then adjusting, playing, adjusting. You're adjusting like a sound engineer would do. So again, I'll just make an example. So I think this really helps with a drive, especially. So sometimes I find that if I'm just doing the back and forth, I make the sound a bit too hot, so to speak. Here we go. Yeah, that sounds just about right to me. Let's move on to the cab. Again, as always, you can go through various microphones. What I find, and you can hear it pretty clearly here in this example, the distance and the early refraction, which are not available in all the cabs, but those really make quite a difference in that feel of having an amp in the room, so to speak. Sometimes you don't want that. So let me play that loop again, and I'm going to turn these to 0, the distance and the early refraction, and you will hear how much it gives that sensation of having the amp in a room. This is dry, completely dry. So you can hear it sounds a bit like the amp is in the toilet, so to speak, with tiles. That's the classic putting the amp in the bathroom. So that's a classic studio trick. But it really depends what kind of sound you want. I find that can be a bit too, depending on the style that you play, can be a bit too much. So let's go back and kind of dry the sound a bit more. Yeah, that sounds about right to me. It's not too dry, but it gives that sense of a bit of ambience, so to speak. Another trick that I've learned is the low cut, high cut. I usually use this in the impulse response and in a lot of my sounds. This one actually, this cab is okay. The 112, the Lux, is I like smaller amps. But in every impulse response, even the custom impulse response that I use, I tend to put the low cut at about between 80 and 120 hertz, and the high cut about between 6 and 8K, because that's usually enough to create space for the other instruments. You don't want to have, sometimes I know that we feel that we want to have a lot of bass in the sound, like you want that kind of punchy, bassy sound. But then when you use it in context, and I will share another example of what I do, it creates that kind of muddy sound with a bass, so to speak. So again, you want a low cut. Here I'm about 126 hertz for the low cut and 6.8, like 7K for the high cut, because you don't want too much trebly step to interfere with the cymbals and the synths, and too much bass to create too much mud, so to speak, with the bass and the kick drum. And I find sometimes that there's a difference between a sound that you're creating in isolation, meaning just like you're playing a solo guitar tune, and a sound that you're creating to play with a band. Those are two different, completely different sounds. So one will have more frequencies, so to speak. You don't have to worry too much about interfering with the instruments. Where playing in a band, your sound will be usually, what's the word? You want more mid range. You want to focus on the mid range, so to speak. That's where I find sometimes most of the guitars, like the 500 hertz to 1K, so to speak. I find I'm not a sound engineer, but I find that that's where usually the guitar lives, and you want to kind of push the sound, so to speak. Maybe let's call it even like 3K, like that. 3K I find sometimes is a bit too much because you catch too much of the sound of the picking, so to speak. And there's a bit of a trick there because you want the global EQ. Sometimes you can see here I have a bit of a notch at 3.4K because I find sometimes with strats you get too much of the picking sound. And I find sometimes engineers tend to kind of boost that frequency, which I don't know, I don't agree with, but it is what it is sometimes. And you can see here I've already have a low cut of 80 hertz and a high cut of 13.7. Those are the filters. This is quite typical for guitar in my experience, but then again, as I said, this is very subjective, and you turn it off and on that way. It's off for the moment, but you can turn it on. So this is like having an extra block, the global EQ. If you want to use it, that's an extra final EQ for your sound, so to speak. And you can access it by pushing the page back and forward, and then one page forward. It's in the global settings, so to speak. But in the editor is here in the window global EQ. That's where you can give a final touch, so to speak. So how do you find a good sound that works in a band? This is not the trick. Play some background music while you're making the sound. So find a track that is similar to what you want, especially if it's a backing track with a guitar. I find in my experience that's the best type of backing track that you can use. So something that has, nowadays you can have also go on those websites where you can remove the guitar, like you can turn everything to stems and then put it back together, master it, and usually it's already good level, so to speak. So you can do that. You can find a track, especially maybe a track that similar to those that you're playing, remove the guitar and use it as a backing track, so that you can create a sound. And sometimes you actually want the original sound because you're trying to copy the equalization, the compression of that, or the distortion of that track, so to speak. But do it while you're playing. I don't want to use it right now in this video because I don't want to have problems with copyright infringement. But that's really what I do most of the times. I create the sounds while I am playing along to a track in the same style, so to speak. So that I already get that feel of not wanting to interfere with the bass, not wanting to have too much trouble like focusing the sound. Because some sounds are not, like a metal sound is very different from like a blues sound. So you want something the same style, so to speak. Okay, so same thing with a looper. If you're working on a lead sound, play something that is like lead, play something that is like, okay. You can see how easy it becomes, how quick it becomes to make a sound when you go through these things. You have a looper, you have a backing track on the same style, and you try to basically get the sound so that it fits a particular frequency range, so to speak. Another trick that I do, I try to monitor on different like monitors. I will make the sound with different headphones. With a set of headphones, I will make it with in-ear monitors. I will play the sound through the speakers. If you have a PA system, obviously that's great because ultimately that's where you're going to be played through. So I call that mastering, meaning that I try to get a consistent sound through different systems. Okay, sound that I use, because you will notice that if you, especially if you plug into different systems, you will have, it's a bit like using the same pedal on different amps, you will get different response, so to speak. So try to do that. Try to check the sounds that you make into as many devices that you have, so to speak. Especially if you're trying to make sounds that will be played either on huge speakers, so you want to check the low end, or tiny speakers, like in a studio setting where you want, it's more like the mid range that you're after, so to speak. Or if you're just trying to get monitoring in terms of in-ear monitors, so you want to get a good, reliable, consistent sound without too many peaks, so to speak. And again, use the global EQ, which is a great little feature, I think. The last trick, it's again another trick, especially for lead sounds, is to have one, if you have enough blocks, of course, to spend on this, to trigger multiple blocks, and one of the blocks will be an EQ. In this case, for a lead sound, I want the distortion and the EQ, because a lot of the going from rhythm to lead is equalization, is not necessarily a boost in volume. So I want two blocks to go at the same time, to be triggered at the same time, so to speak. So the last thing is a compressor. I find the compressors, a lot of people don't use compressors when they make these sounds. I don't know, it depends on the style. Usually models are used in pop and metal, so to speak, so you want compression because you want to have a consistent sound. And I tend to put it towards the beginning, and I use it. I use one where I can mix, and again, a lot of people tend to have the mix always 100%, and I agree to a certain extent. When I find that when I do that, and if I play live, if I dig in, if I want the dynamics, I don't have them. So I tend to find a spot. It doesn't really matter about how much you compress the sound, but I try to find a spot in the mix, slider, so to speak, where I can still get some dynamic. There is enough dry sound for me to have a little bit more if I want it. It doesn't feel totally compressed. It doesn't feel totally compressed. See how much compression there is. Obviously, I would have to make up with the level. And where I want to have a bit of a a trade-off, so to speak, where I can still have a bit of dynamic. The level and the knee, obviously, the make-up gain and the knee helps a bit in the attack of the sounds, so to speak. I find the compression also helps the sound to feel a bit like a tube amp, because tube amps compress quite a bit, especially the lower powered ones like the Deluxe. They tend to compress the sound quite a bit when you are at a certain volume. It's natural, of course, but I find that modelers don't really do that unless I think probably the profilers are a bit better at that, but modelers in general don't quite do that very well. So I always try to add a bit of like parallel compression, because it makes me feel like I have that. It feels more like an amp, so to speak. So these are my suggestions, so to speak. So looper, just to summarize, use a looper as the first block, or add a looper as the first pedal, so to speak, in your pedal board. Have music playing in the background. Use filters. Try to master the sound, meaning try your sounds, your patches onto as many devices as possible, in speakers and in-ears and headphones. Match, another thing I forgot, match the volume of pedals, but that's something that you do in any pedal boards, not just the, just modelers trying to, when you switch, let's say, overdrive off, try to have the same volume, if that's what you want, and EQ settings, so to speak, so try to find things that match. And then use the mix and the compressor. Again, I find that really helps. So again, these were a bunch of random suggestions that I found that really helped me to get a better sound. more consistent sound, and sounded better when I was at a gig, so to speak. And I did it with a Helix, but this really, you can do it with any modeler, so to speak. And I hope this really helped. As always, remember that there is that. I'm not going to upload the patch because this wasn't necessarily a new patch, but remember that there is that folder of patches. And again, I want to thank you if you made a donation. I'm going to leave a link in the description and a pinned comment. I want to thank again those that downloaded and made some use of these patches and made a donation. And again, if this is of any value to you, please like and subscribe as always. It really helps to share the knowledge of this channel. And that's really it, really. Bye bye.